A girl had a nightmare every night. She didn't know it was the Hell Angel biker memories. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same thing. A blazing motorcycle racing through a burning desert, and a voice whispering, "Find home." She thought it was just a dream. Until one night she wakes up shaking, and her mother finally breaks, revealing a truth that turns her whole world upside down. Because those nightmares aren't random. They're memories from the biker who saved her life as a baby, and died the same night. But when she goes searching for answers, she discovers a hidden brotherhood, a broken youth center, and a message the biker tried to send her from the moment she was rescued. A message that's only getting louder. Why is she the only one hearing his voice? And what will she uncover when she finally learns what "find home" really means? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The flickering lamp cast uncertain shadows across Aria Whitlock's bedroom as she bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sweat dampened her cotton pajamas, and her hands trembled as she pushed damp strands of hair from her face. 4:37 glowed in angry red digits on her bedside clock, just minutes before her usual dawn, awakening from the nightmare that had plagued her for weeks. "Not again," she whispered, her voice quavering in the pre-dawn stillness. The remnants of the dream clung to her consciousness like cobwebs. The thunderous rumble of motorcycle engines, the blood-red sky stretching endlessly over desert highways, and that voice. That gravelly, mournful voice that whispered the same two words that followed her into every waking moment. "Find home." The lamp beside her bed flickered again, as if responding to her distress. Aria wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to still her racing heart. The dream felt more real with each passing night, more urgent somehow. The leather-clad figure on the motorcycle, neither clearly man nor angel, but something in between, seemed to be racing against time itself, leaving trails of golden light in its wake. With trembling legs, Aria forced herself out of bed. Sleep would not return now. It never did after the nightmare. She shuffled to her bathroom, wincing at her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally bright complexion had taken on a wan, exhausted cast. The young receptionist barely recognized herself anymore. The morning routine she'd once found comforting now felt like moving through molasses. Every motion required conscious effort, brushing her teeth, washing her face, combing her hair. The dream had drained her, just as it had every morning for the past month. "You're just tired," she told her reflection, but the words rang hollow. This was more than simple fatigue. The dreams felt like memories she couldn't quite grasp, like someone was trying to tell her something important, something she needed to understand. The day at the dental office where she worked passed in a fog. Aria moved through her tasks mechanically, greeting patients, filing insurance claims, scheduling appointments. Her coworkers cast concerned glances her way, but she managed weak smiles and deflected their questions with practiced ease. When evening finally arrived, Aria drove to her mother's house for their weekly dinner. The setting sun painting the Arizona sky in shades that were too close to her nightmare for comfort. Helen Whitlock's modest home sat on a quiet street lined with palm trees, its warm porch light a beacon of welcome. The familiar scent of her mother's cooking, tonight it was lasagna, wrapped around Aria as she stepped inside. Helen looked up from setting the table, her face creasing with worry as she took in her daughter's appearance. "Oh, sweetheart," Helen said softly, pulling Aria into a tight hug. "You look exhausted." Aria melted into her mother's embrace, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I am, Mom. I really am." Over dinner, the words Arya had been holding back for weeks finally spilled out. "It's the same dream every single night," she explained, pushing her food around her plate. "There's this figure on a motorcycle. Sometimes I think it's an angel, but there's something different about it. The sky is this terrible red color, like it's on fire, and the whole time I hear this voice." Helen's fork clattered against her plate. "A voice?" she asked, her own voice unusually tight. Arya nodded, not noticing her mother's sudden tension. "It's deep, kind of rough, like somebody who's seen too much. All it says is, 'Find home,' over and over. But Mom, it feels so real. Like it's not just a dream. Like it's trying to tell me something important." Helen's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "Dreams often feel that way when we're stressed, sweetheart. Maybe you should think about talking to someone? Dr. Martinez helped you so much with your anxiety in college." "This is different," Arya insisted, looking up to meet her mother's worried gaze. "It's not like the anxiety dreams. Those felt like my brain spinning out of control. This feels like a message. Like something I need to remember." Helen reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You're not sleeping properly, honey. That's bound to affect you. Promise me you'll at least think about talking to someone?" Arya nodded, though they both knew she wouldn't. How could she explain to a therapist that she was certain these weren't ordinary dreams? That the mysterious biker angel and its message felt more real than her waking hours? Later, as Arya prepared to leave, Helen stood in the doorway watching her daughter walk to her car. The porch light cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the deep worry lines that had formed there. She remained in the doorway long after Arya's taillights had disappeared around the corner, her hands clasped tightly together. Back in her apartment, Arya went through her bedtime routine with growing dread. Each step brought her closer to the inevitable moment when she would have to close her eyes and face the dream again. She changed into her pajamas, brushed her teeth, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the lamp that had become both comfort and herald of her nightly terrors. "Please," she whispered to the empty room, though she wasn't sure what she was asking for the dream to stop or for it to finally make sense. The lamp flickered once, twice, as if in response, and Arya felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm Arizona night. As she lay down and pulled the covers up to her chin, Arya could already feel the familiar tendrils of fear curling in her stomach. She knew what waited for her in sleep. The endless highway, the blood-red sky, the mysterious figure blazing a trail of light through the desert night. But most of all, she dreaded that voice, that sorrowful, urgent voice that seemed to speak directly to her soul, calling her to something she couldn't understand. The lamp cast its uncertain light across the room as Arya closed her eyes, her heart already beginning to race. Soon, she knew, she would be back on that highway, watching the biker angel race against time, listening to those two words that had become both puzzle and torment. Find home. Sunlight streamed through Helen's kitchen windows, warming the cheerful yellow walls, but the atmosphere inside felt heavy with unspoken words. Arya watched her mother's hands shake as she poured coffee into their matching ceramic mugs, spilling drops onto the countertop. This wasn't her mother's usual morning clumsiness. Something was wrong. "Mom," Arya said softly, reaching out to steady the coffee pot. "What's going on? You look like you haven't slept at all." Helen set the pot down carefully and sank into her chair at the small breakfast table. Her face was pale, making the dark circles under her eyes stand out even more. "I've been thinking about your dreams," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Arya wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, letting its warmth seep into her cold fingers. What about them? They might not be just dreams. Helen's words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for too long. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Arya's heart began to race, echoing the steady tick-tick-tick. Mom? Helen's hands trembled as she reached across the table to grasp Arya's. Sweetheart, you're adopted. The words hung in the air between them. Arya felt like all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. What? But that's not all. Helen's grip tightened. The circumstances, they were unusual, traumatic even. Arya pulled her hands away, her coffee forgotten. What do you mean, traumatic? Tears welled in Helen's eyes. You were brought to me one night, when you were just a toddler, by a man on a motorcycle. He was badly hurt, Arya. He made me promise to keep you safe, to never tell you until you were strong enough to handle the truth. Handle what truth? Arya's voice cracked. Mom, what are you saying? The man, Helen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. He died that same night, after making sure you were safe with me. I never even knew his name. The room spun around Arya. Her nightmares, the biker, the desperate voice, suddenly took on a terrifying new meaning. All these years, she whispered, all these years you never told me. I wanted to protect you, Helen pleaded. You were so sensitive, so prone to anxiety. I was afraid the truth would hurt you more than help you. Arya stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I have to go to work. Arya, please. I can't process this right now. I need time. The day at the medical office where Arya worked as a receptionist passed in a blur. She made mistakes entering patient information, had to ask people to repeat themselves multiple times, and nearly scheduled 3 appointments for the same time slot. Her coworkers noticed her distraction, but she waved off their concerns with weak smiles and mumbled excuses about not sleeping well. Every quiet moment was filled with questions that burned in her mind. Who was the mysterious biker? Why had he rescued her? What had he been running from? And most importantly, why was he haunting her dreams now, after all these years? By the time her shift ended, Arya's shock had hardened into determination. She drove straight to her mother's house, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Helen opened the door before she could even knock, as if she'd been waiting by the window. Tell me everything, Arya demanded as soon as she stepped inside. Every detail you remember about that night. I need to know. Helen led her to the living room couch, where they had shared so many movie nights and heart-to-heart talks over the years. Now it felt like foreign territory. It was raining, Helen began, her voice distant with memory. A terrible storm. I heard this motorcycle engine, so loud in the quiet neighborhood, then pounding on my door. Arya listened intently as Helen described opening her door to find a massive man in leather, cradling a sleeping toddler in his arms. How he'd been bleeding from what looked like bullet wounds, but refused to let her call an ambulance. How he'd made her promise to protect the little angel and never speak of that night until the time was right. He said something about keeping you hidden, Helen continued, twisting her hands in her lap. That bad people might come looking. He made me swear to change your name, to never tell anyone how you came to me. The adoption papers, well, let's just say they weren't exactly official. So my name isn't even really Arya? Helen shook her head. He never told me your original name, just said to give you a new one, a safe one. Arya stood up and paced the room, her mind racing. Why now? Why are these dreams starting now? I don't know, sweetheart, but... Helen stood and walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner. She opened a hidden compartment Arya had never noticed before, and pulled out something that gleamed dully in the lamplight. "He left this with you. I've kept it safe all these years." Arya's hands shook as she accepted the item, a rusted motorcycle key hanging from a heavy chain. It felt warm in her palm, as if it had been waiting for her all this time. "It was his," Helen said softly, watching her daughter's face as the truth of her past settled over her like a heavy blanket. Arya sat at the kitchen table, the rusted key still warm in her palm, as Helen placed 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea between them. The familiar scent that had always meant comfort now seemed strange, out of place in this moment of unraveling truths. "His name was Rex Maddox," Helen began softly, wrapping her hands around her mug. "But he told me everyone called him Redwing. He never explained why." Arya's fingers tightened around the key. "Tell me everything, Mom. Please." Helen took a deep breath, her eyes distant with memories she'd kept locked away for so long. "It wasn't just rain that night. There was smoke in the air, even through the storm. I could smell it on his leather jacket when he handed you to me. He said—" She paused, collecting herself. "He said there had been a fire at a compound out in the desert, a gang war that turned ugly." "A compound?" Arya's voice wavered. Was that where I came from?" Helen nodded slowly. "He didn't give me many details, but he said it wasn't safe there. Not for a little girl. He told me he couldn't leave you there to become another casualty of their violence." She reached across the table and squeezed Arya's free hand. "He stole you away during the chaos, Arya. He saved your life." The weight of this revelation pressed against Arya's chest. She thought of her recurring nightmare, the blood-red sky, the thundering motorcycle. Had those been fragments of memory, somehow preserved in her toddler mind? "He was hurt so badly," Helen continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Bullet wounds in his side and shoulder. I begged him to let me call an ambulance, but he refused. Said he needed to make sure you were properly placed with authorities first, somewhere safe where they couldn't track you down." "What happened to him?" Arya whispered, though somehow she already knew the answer. "He died at the hospital, just hours after dropping you off at the police station. The officers who came to question me said he never revealed who had shot him or where the compound was located. His last words were about making sure you were protected." Helen wiped at her eyes. "The adoption process was expedited because of the circumstances. They wanted to place you quickly, keep you hidden. I had just been approved as a foster parent, and when they asked if I would take you permanently—" She smiled tearfully. "It felt like fate." Arya sat in stunned silence, her tea growing cold and forgotten. The man from her dreams, Redwing, had given his life to save her. But why was he reaching out to her now after all these years? "I need to know more about him," she said finally, standing up. "There has to be information somewhere." Helen watched as Arya retrieved her laptop from her bag and set it up on the kitchen table. The soft blue glow of the screen illuminated their faces as Arya typed "Rex Redwing Maddox Biker Arizona" into the search bar. The results made her gasp. "Mom, look at this," she said, turning the screen. "The Guardian wheels, they're still around, but they're different now." She clicked through several news articles and social media posts. "They've completely changed. They're a community outreach program, working with at-risk youth and doing charity rides." Helen leaned in, reading over her shoulder. "The articles mention Redwing. They say his death was a turning point for the club. They reformed in his memory." Arya scrolled through photographs of leather-clad bikers surrounded by smiling kids, helping at food banks, organizing fundraisers. Each image seemed to chip away at the frightening outlaw image she'd initially imagined. "There's a quote here from one of the original members," she read aloud. Redwing always said we could be better than what we were. His last ride showed us what real courage looked like, putting someone else's life above your own. We honor his memory by trying to be the men he believed we could be." Hours passed as Arya dove deeper into research, piecing together fragments of the man who had saved her life. The more she learned, the more complex the picture became. Redwing had been feared by some, revered by others, but consistently described as someone who protected the vulnerable, especially children. When Helen finally went to bed, Arya remained at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed articles and scribbled notes. The old key lay before her, its rusted surface catching the dim light. She picked it up, running her thumb over its worn teeth. "Why am I dreaming about you?" she whispered to the empty room. "What are you trying to tell me?" Only silence answered, but somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the desert, like the echo of a motorcycle's roar. The questions tumbled through her mind. Was Redwing trying to tell her something through these dreams? Did he want her to find the guardian wheels? And most troublingly, were the people he'd saved her from still out there somewhere? She stared at the key, wondering what lock it had once opened, what secrets it might still protect. The metal felt heavier than it should, weighted with unspoken history and mysteries yet to be uncovered. Arya knew sleep would be impossible tonight. Her entire life had been built on a foundation she hadn't known existed, and now that foundation was shifting beneath her feet. The nightmare that had haunted her for weeks had transformed from a terrifying mystery into something more complex. A message, perhaps, from the man who had given everything to give her a chance at life. The key remained clutched in her hand as the night deepened, its presence both a comfort and a challenge. Whatever answers lay ahead, Arya knew her life would never be the same. The dreams hadn't been a warning after all. They had been an awakening, calling her toward a truth she hadn't known she needed to find. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Arya guided her car through the winding streets of Copper Springs, a small desert town that time seemed to have forgotten. Her GPS had led her to the industrial outskirts, where weathered buildings stretched their long shadows across empty lots. After 2 hours of driving, her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as she approached her destination. The Guardian Wheels garage announced itself with a faded sign and the steady thrum of engines that vibrated through the shimmering air. The building was a large, corrugated metal structure, its walls decorated with carefully painted murals of motorcycles and positive messages about community and hope. Several bikes gleamed in the lot, their chrome catching the harsh Arizona sunlight. Arya parked her sedan, feeling immediately out of place among the rows of motorcycles. The smell of motor oil and sun-baked asphalt filled her nostrils as she stepped out, clutching her purse where Redwing's key lay hidden. The garage's massive doors stood open, revealing several figures moving between tool benches and partially dismantled bikes. "Can I help you?" a deep voice rumbled. Arya turned to find herself facing an enormous man with a salt and pepper beard that reached his chest. Despite his intimidating size, his eyes were kind, reminding her of a gentle bear, which made sense given the grisly patch on his leather vest. I'm looking for someone who might have known Rex Maddox," she managed to say, her voice smaller than she intended. The big man's expression shifted subtly. "Redwing, come inside. Too hot to talk business in the sun?" He led her into the garage, where the temperature dropped slightly thanks to several industrial fans. A woman in oil-stained coveralls looked up from an engine she was working on, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight braid. "Marlene," Grizzly called out, "we've got a visitor asking about Redwing." The woman, Marlene, wiped her hands on a rag and approached, her sharp eyes studying Arya with open curiosity. "Don't get many folks asking about him these days. Who might you be?" Before Arya could answer, a younger man emerged from what appeared to be an office, his tattooed arms visible beneath a rolled-up flannel shirt. He moved with an easy grace that suggested he was comfortable in any situation. "I'm Jax," he said, offering a friendly nod. "And you look like you've got quite a story to tell." Arya took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "My name is Arya Whitlock, and I think Rex Maddox saved my life when I was very young." The ambient noise of the garage seemed to vanish. Tools stopped moving. Conversations ceased. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on her with intense focus. With trembling fingers, Arya reached into her purse and withdrew the rusted key on its chain. "This was his. My mother kept it all these years." Marlene's hand flew to her mouth. Grizzly took an involuntary step forward. Jax's easy smile transformed into something more complex. "Lord above," Marlene whispered. "You're the little one. The baby he brought in that night." Grizzly pulled up a shop stool. "You better sit down, child. This is something we never thought we'd see." As Arya settled onto the stool, the 3 members gathered around her, their expressions a mix of wonder and barely contained emotion. Jax disappeared briefly into the office and returned with bottled water for everyone. "He talked about you," Grizzly said softly. "Not the details, those he kept close to protect you. But he'd mentioned there was a little girl out there somewhere, safe, because he'd managed to do one truly good thing in his life." Marlene wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "That man had a way of seeing the good in everybody, even when they couldn't see it themselves. But saving kids, that was what he lived for, and died for in the end." "You have his eyes," Jax observed quietly. "That same look he'd get when something mattered, like you're seeing right through to the heart of things." One by one, they shared their memories of Red Wing, how he'd mentor troubled teens, teaching them to work on bikes instead of joining gangs, how he'd somehow know exactly when someone needed help, showing up at the right moment with the right words, or just silent support, how he believed the club could be more than its violent past. "He wasn't perfect," Marlene admitted. "None of us were, but he was trying to change things right up until the end." The afternoon light slanted through the garage doors as they talked, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Finally, Grizzly's expression grew troubled. "Thing is," he said heavily, "we're struggling to keep his legacy going. The youth center we run, it's where we teach kids mechanical skills, give them a safe place to be after school, but we've had trouble lately." Jax nodded grimly. "Vandalism, break-ins, and our funding's being cut. We might have to shut down in a few months if something doesn't change." "These kids need us," Marlene added fiercely. "Just like they needed Red Wing back then, but we're running out of options." The weight of their words settled over the garage like a heavy blanket. Arya looked around at the tools, the bikes, the worn but well-maintained equipment. She could almost see the ghosts of all the lives that had been changed in this space, all the second chances that had been given. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Arya found herself back in her car. The key felt warm in her hand, as if it held some of the day's revelations in its metal. Through her windshield, she could see the garage's mural silhouetted against the darkening sky, a phoenix rising from flames, symbolizing transformation and hope. Her fingers tightened around the key. She had come seeking answers about her past, but she had found something more, a living testament to the man who had saved her, and a mission that desperately needed help. The weight of everything she had learned pressed against her chest, but it wasn't crushing. It was calling. Sitting there in the gathering dusk, Arya knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't simply drive away and return to her ordinary life. Red Wing's world, with all its complications and challenges, had become part of her story now. The key in her hand wasn't just a relic of the past, it was unlocking a future she never could have imagined. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Arya pulled into the Guardian Wheels parking lot again. Her hands trembled slightly as she cut the engine, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. The garage doors were already open, country music drifting out along with the familiar scent of motor oil and coffee. Grizzly stood in the entrance, massive arms crossed over his chest, but his stern expression melted into a warm smile when he saw her. "Wasn't sure you'd come back," he said softly. Arya stepped out of her car, squinting against the early light. "I couldn't stay away. I kept thinking about everything you all told me about Red Wing. About this place." Marlene emerged from the office, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She passed one to Arya. "Perfect timing. We're about to head over to the youth center. Want to see what your guardian angel helped build?" The center was housed in an old warehouse just down the street. Paint peeled from its walls, and plywood covered one broken window, but somehow it still managed to look welcoming. A faded mural of motorcycles and spreading wings decorated one wall. "It's not much," Grizzly admitted as he unlocked the front door, "but it's home for a lot of kids who don't have anywhere else to go after school." Inside, the space opened into a large common room filled with mismatched furniture, worn couches, study tables, and a small kitchen area. One corner held computers for homework, while another featured a pool table and board games. The walls were covered with artwork, everything from graffiti-style pieces to careful pencil drawings. "Most of these were done by our kids," Marlene explained, noting Arya's interest in the artwork. "We try to encourage any kind of positive expression they want to explore." They showed her the classroom where they taught basic mechanics, the small library stocked with donated books, and the counseling office where Jax spent most of his time. Everything was well used but clean, loved despite its shabbiness. "The vandals got in through here last month," Grizzly said, pointing to the boarded window. "Spray-painted some walls, broke some equipment. We cleaned up what we could, but replacing everything's been tough. By mid-morning, teens started trickling in. Some came for tutoring, others just needed a safe place to hang out." Arya noticed one girl immediately. Thin, with fierce eyes and defensive posture, she kept to the edges of the room, watching everything. "That's Misty," Marlene said quietly. 14 years old, been coming here about 6 months. Smart as a whip, but she's had it rough. Takes a while to earn her trust." As if hearing her name, Misty's gaze locked onto Arya. There was something familiar in that wary look. Arya recognized her own past uncertainty about belonging anywhere. Throughout the day, Arya found herself naturally falling into the center's rhythm. She sorted through boxes of donated school supplies, swept floors, and helped Marlene make sandwiches for the hungry teens. Every task, no matter how small, felt purposeful. During a quiet moment, she found herself near Misty, who was sketching in a tattered notebook. "That's beautiful," Arya said softly, glimpsing an intricate motorcycle design. Misty's shoulders tensed, but she didn't close the notebook. "You're new," she said flatly. "Yes, I'm Arya." "Why are you here?" The question was blunt, challenging. Arya considered her answer carefully. "I'm learning about someone who used to be part of this place, someone who helped me when I was very young." "Red Wing," Misty said, surprising her. "They talk about him sometimes, say he was different from other bikers." "Did you know him?" "No, but—" Misty hesitated, then turned her notebook slightly so Arya could see better. "I draw what they describe. The stories help me think maybe not all adults are lying when they say they want to help." The afternoon passed quickly. Arya helped serve snacks, listened to kids practice reading, and watched Grizzly patiently teach basic engine repair to a group of fascinated teens. Everything felt right in a way she couldn't explain. As the sun began to set, she found herself reluctant to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow," she told Grizzly and Marlene. "If that's okay?" "More than okay," Marlene said, pulling her into an unexpected hug. "You belong here, girl. We all feel it." That night, as Arya drifted off to sleep, the familiar dream began to form. The desert highway stretched endlessly, the sky painted in deep reds and golds. The leather-clad figure appeared, but something was different. The thunderous roar of the motorcycle seemed less threatening, more like a guardian's watchful presence. "Find home," the gravelly voice whispered, but this time it held warmth, almost pride. The words wrapped around her like a protective embrace, rather than a haunting echo. When Arya woke at dawn, her chest wasn't tight with fear. Instead, she felt a deep sense of peace, as if something inside her had finally clicked into place. For the first time since the dreams began, she understood they weren't meant to frighten her. They were guiding her exactly where she needed to be. She lay in bed, watching the sunrise paint her ceiling in soft gold, thinking about Misty's drawings, Grizzly's gentle strength, and Marlene's fierce dedication. She thought about Redwing, who had given his life to save a toddler he didn't know, and about all the lives still being changed because of his vision for the Guardian wheels. The morning light grew stronger, and with it came certainty. She wasn't afraid of the dreams anymore because she was beginning to understand their message. Home wasn't just a place. It was a purpose, a belonging, a chance to continue what her guardian angel had started. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Arya pulled into the Guardian Wheels parking lot. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, despite the early hour. The garage door was already open, country music drifting out along with the familiar scent of motor oil and coffee. Jax looked up from a workbench as she entered, his friendly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Morning. Ready to get your hands dirty?" "What do you mean?" Arya asked, setting down her purse. "Well, if you're going to be part of this place, you should know the basics." He gestured to a motorcycle positioned in the center of the work area. "Every Guardian wheel knows how to at least check the oil and change a tire." Arya's eyes widened. "Oh, I don't know anything about engines." "Perfect time to learn then." Jax handed her a worn shop rag and began pointing out parts of the engine. "This here's the oil dipstick." For the next hour, Arya struggled with various tools, dropping wrenches and getting grease on her shirt. But rather than feeling embarrassed, she found herself laughing at her own clumsiness. Jax was patient, demonstrating each step again and again until she got it right. "There you go," he exclaimed as she successfully checked the oil level. "You're a natural." "A naturally messy natural," she giggled, holding up her blackened hands. Around mid-morning, Grizzly wandered in with fresh coffee for everyone. As they took a break, he settled onto an old couch in the corner, his massive frame making it look like doll furniture. "Reminds me of teaching Tommy basic maintenance," he said quietly, his eyes distant with memory. "Tommy?" Arya asked, settling beside him. Grizzly nodded slowly. "Kid Redwing found about 15 years ago. Barely 13, sleeping under bridges, running from something bad at home." His voice grew softer. "Red spotted him one night, cold and hungry. Instead of just giving him food and moving on, he brought him here." Arya leaned forward, drawn in by the gentleness in the big man's voice as he continued. "Tommy was scared of everyone at first. But Red, he had this way about him. Rough as he looked, that man had the kindest heart I've ever known. Spent weeks teaching Tommy about bikes, showing him how to build things with his hands instead of destroying himself. What happened to Tommy? Arya asked. A smile crept across Grizzly's weathered face. He's a mechanical engineer now. Married, 2 kids. Comes back every Christmas to help with our toy drive. He looked at Arya intently. That was Red's gift, seeing past people's rough edges to who they could become, giving them a chance to be more than their circumstances. Around noon, Arya noticed Misty arriving, carrying her usual sketchbook and a small bag of art supplies. The girl hesitated in the doorway, eyeing the ladder and paint cans set up against the building's exterior wall. We're starting the mural today, Marlene explained to Arya. Misty designed it, but she's nervous about painting something so big. Arya walked over to the teenager. Would you like some help? I'm not much of an artist, but I can follow directions. Misty studied her for a long moment before pulling out her design, an intricate pattern of wheels and wings surrounding the words Guardian Wheels Youth Center in bold letters. You can help with the background, she said finally. Just don't mess it up. For the next several hours, they worked side by side. Gradually, Misty's rigid posture relaxed as she focused on the artwork. She even started explaining her color choices to Arya, growing animated as she described how the sunset colors would blend together. The wings are like his name, Red Wing, she said softly, adding detailed feathers to the design. But they're also about freedom. Everyone needs a chance to fly away from bad stuff. As the afternoon faded into evening, savory smells began wafting from the community kitchen. Every Wednesday, the Guardian Wheels hosted dinner for members, youth, and anyone else who needed a meal. Arya followed the aroma to find tables being set up and massive pots of chili simmering on the stove. Hope you're staying, Marlene said, handing her a stack of plates. Wednesday dinner's special around here. Soon the room was filled with people, riders in leather vests chatting with teens in hoodies, elderly neighbors bringing homemade cornbread, young families with children running between tables. Arya found herself caught up in the warm chaos of it all, serving food and listening to stories that flowed as freely as the sweet tea. Looking around at the mismatched collection of people sharing meals and laughter, Arya felt something shift in her heart. These weren't just bikers or troubled teens or community members. They were family, a chosen family, built on second chances and shared hope. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she finally pulled into her driveway. The house lights were still on, and she found Helen waiting up in the kitchen. You're out late, her mother said, but her tone was gentle, curious rather than accusatory. Arya sank into a chair, suddenly realizing how tired she was, and how happy. Mom, I have so much to tell you. For the next hour, she shared everything, learning basic mechanics with Jax, hearing Grizzly's story about Tommy, painting with Misty, and the wonderful chaos of the community dinner. As she spoke, she watched Helen's concerned expression slowly soften. They're good people, Mom, Arya finished. I know some of their pasts might be rough, but they're doing such important work. The center, it saves lives, just like Red Wing saved mine. Helen reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. I've spent so many years being afraid of the truth coming out, afraid of losing you to your past. But seeing you like this, so alive and purposeful. She took a deep breath. I'm relieved. You deserve to know where you came from, and it seems like you're finding much more than just answers. That night, as Arya drifted off to sleep, the familiar dream began to form. But this time, when the leather-clad figure appeared on the desert highway, she could see his face clearly in the red-gold light. His weathered features creased in a gentle smile as he whispered, "Keep going." The words followed her into peaceful sleep, a blessing and a promise wrapped into one. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Arya's phone rang, startling her from a half-doze on the couch. She fumbled for it, recognizing Marlene's number. "Arya?" Marlene's voice crackled with unusual excitement. "You need to get down here right now. We found something. Something of Red Wing's." Arya sat bolt upright, suddenly wide awake. "What is it?" "A lockbox, hidden away in the garage attic. We were doing some cleaning and just get here, okay?" 20 minutes later, Arya's car kicked up dust as she pulled into the Guardian Wheels parking lot. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she hurried inside. The main garage was empty, except for Marlene, Grizzly, and Jax, who were gathered around a weathered metal box on one of the workbenches. "It was tucked behind some old boxes," Marlene explained, her usually steady hands trembling slightly as she worked the lock. "We recognized his mark on it right away. That little wing symbol he used to draw on everything." The lock finally clicked open. Everyone held their breath as Marlene carefully lifted the lid. The first thing they pulled out was a leather jacket, the material cracked and faded with age but still supple. The back bore a hand-painted design of red wings spreading across the shoulders. Arya ran her fingers over the worn leather, imagining the man who had once worn it. "This was his favorite," Grizzly said softly. "Never rode without it. Said those wings made him feel like he could fly away from anything." Beneath the jacket lay several folders and loose papers. But what caught Arya's eye was a photograph, its edges worn soft with handling. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The image showed a massive man in a leather jacket, his face weathered but kind, holding a tiny girl with wild, dark curls. The toddler was laughing, reaching up to touch his beard, completely unafraid of the intimidating figure holding her. "That's you," Marlene whispered, squeezing Arya's shoulder. "And that's Red Wing." Arya couldn't speak. She traced the outline of the man's face with trembling fingers, trying to match it to the figure from her dreams. The photo captured such tenderness between them. No hint of the violence and fear that would come later. At the bottom of the box lay an envelope, yellowed with age but carefully sealed. Written across the front in bold, rough handwriting were the words, "My little rider." "That's his writing," Jax confirmed quietly. "No doubt about it." Arya stared at the envelope for a long moment before carefully breaking the seal. The paper inside was covered in the same strong handwriting. "My little rider. If you're reading this, I guess I finally did something right by getting you somewhere safe. I want you to know I had been planning it for weeks. Watching, waiting for the right moment to get you away from that compound. You deserved so much better than that life. From the first time I saw you toddle past on those wobbly legs, something in me changed. You weren't afraid of anyone, just full of light and laughter. You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost it all. I don't know if I'll make it through getting you out. But even if I don't, know that saving you was worth everything. You were worth everything. Find good people. Find love. Find home." The words blurred as tears spilled down Arya's cheeks. She pressed the letter to her chest, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Without hesitation, Marlene wrapped her in a fierce hug. Then Grizzly's massive arms encircled them both, and Jax joined in until Arya was surrounded by warmth and love. "You're his legacy," Marlene said firmly, her own voice thick with emotion. "Everything we do here, everything we stand for, it all started with him saving you, and now you've come full circle, back to where you belong." They spent hours going through the rest of the box's contents. Old photos of Red Wing with various kids he'd helped, letters of thanks from families, newspaper clippings about the Guardian Wheels community work. Each item painted a clearer picture of the man who had sacrificed everything to save a little girl. As the sun began to set, Arya carefully packed everything back into the box, except for the photo and letter, which she tucked safely in her purse. The leather jacket she hung reverently on a hook near the garage entrance. "It should stay here," she said, "where it can remind everyone what the Guardian Wheels stand for." That night, as Arya drifted off to sleep, the familiar dream began. The desert highway stretched out beneath a blood-red sky, the thundering motorcycle approaching. But this time, when the rider drew near, he pulled his motorcycle to a stop. With deliberate movements, he removed his helmet, revealing the same weathered, kind face from the photograph. He looked directly at her and nodded, a gentle smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Find home," he whispered. Arya woke with tears on her cheeks, but they weren't tears of fear or confusion. For the first time, she felt like she truly understood what Redwing had been trying to tell her. Home wasn't just a place. It was people who loved you, a purpose that gave life meaning, and the courage to embrace both. The photo of Redwing holding her sat on her nightstand, catching the first rays of dawn. In the growing light, their shared smiles seemed to glow with promise. Dawn was just breaking when Arya pulled into the Guardian Wheels parking lot, the morning air crisp and full of promise. She had volunteered to help open the center early today, wanting to organize some donations before the teens arrived. But as she rounded the corner, her heart stopped. Fire trucks lined the street, their red lights painting the smoke-filled air in eerie pulses. The acrid smell of burnt wood and melted plastic stung her nostrils. Where the youth center had stood proud just yesterday, now sat a blackened shell. "No," she whispered, stumbling out of her car. "No, no, no!" Grizzly stood like a statue near the building, his massive frame seeming smaller somehow. Marlene sat on the curb, head in her hands. When she looked up at Arya's approach, her eyes were red and hollow. "Someone broke in during the night," Marlene explained, her voice rough. "Set fires in multiple locations. They knew what they were doing." Jax emerged from talking with a fire investigator, his usual gentle expression hardened with anger. "It was the Marcus brothers and their crew. Had to be. We tried working with them last month, but they got kicked out for stealing. Said they'd make us regret it." Arya watched as firefighters continued to spray down hot spots, water running black down the gutted doorway. Through the broken windows, she could see the charred remains of furniture, computers, and tools, all the things they used to help troubled kids build better lives. Two official-looking men in suits approached, flanked by uniformed police officers. The taller one pulled out a clipboard and cleared his throat. "I'm Commissioner Davis," he announced. "Given the extensive damage and the facility's history of code violations, we have no choice but to order an indefinite shutdown. The building is now condemned pending investigation and assessment." Grizzly finally moved, stepping forward with desperate energy. "You can't do that. These kids need us. We'll rebuild, bring everything up to code." "With what money?" the second official interrupted. "Your insurance barely covered the minimum requirements as it was. Between the safety concerns and lack of funding, this center is finished." The words fell like stones in the morning air. Arya watched the hope drain from her friends' faces. Even the teens who had started gathering at the edge of the police tape looked lost, including Misty, who turned and ran when Arya tried to catch her eye. "Clear the area, please," an officer called out. "This is now an active crime scene." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Arya worked alongside the Guardian Wheels members, salvaging what they could from the wreckage once the fire department gave permission. They formed a chain, passing out smoke-damaged items and sorting them into piles, destroyed, possibly salvageable, miraculously intact. The last category was heartbreakingly small. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they boarded up broken windows and secured what remained of the doors. Every nail Arya hammered felt like it was sealing away a piece of hope. She couldn't stop thinking about all the teens who had found sanctuary here, all the lives touched by the Guardian Wheel's mission. Marlene tried maintaining her usual practical attitude, but her voice shook as she catalogued their losses. Most of the tools are ruined, the computers are melted, all the clothing donations, the food pantry supplies. She trailed off, staring at the sooty chaos. "Maybe it's time to accept reality," one of the older members said quietly. "We had a good run, but without this building, without resources." "We can't give up," Arya protested, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. As evening approached, the property grew quiet, except for the occasional creak of settling debris. The official vehicles had long since departed, leaving behind yellow caution tape that snapped in the wind like mocking laughter. Grizzly was the last to leave besides Arya. He stood looking at Redwing's jacket, which had somehow survived in its place by the door, though it now reeked of smoke. "You know what hurts most?" he said softly. "Feeling like we failed him, failed his vision." Arya touched the jacket's worn leather, remembering the photo of Redwing holding her as a toddler. "We haven't failed yet," she whispered, but Grizzly just shook his head and walked away. The drive home seemed to take forever. Arya's clothes stank of smoke. Her muscles ached from hours of lifting debris, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the weight in her heart. When she finally crawled into bed, exhaustion dragged her immediately into sleep. The dream came roaring back with terrible clarity. The desert highway stretched before her, but now flames licked at its edges, turning the already blood-red sky into an inferno. The motorcycle's engine growled like thunder as the rider approached, his leather jacket gleaming in the firelight. This time the flames didn't stop at the road's edge. They rose up, surrounding the rider, engulfing him in a tornado of fire. But still he rode on, straight through the heart of the blaze. As he passed Arya, his whisper cut through the roar of the flames. "Don't stop." Arya jerked awake, her pillow wet with tears. The dream had never felt so real, so urgent. She could still feel the heat of the flames, still hear the determination in that gravelly voice. Looking at the photo on her nightstand, she realized she faced the same choice Redwing had all those years ago: give up in the face of overwhelming odds, or fight for what mattered, no matter the cost. The question was, did she have his courage? The morning sun cast long shadows across the charred remains of the youth center as Arya pulled into the Guardian Wheel's garage. Her eyes felt raw from crying, but a strange determination had taken root in her heart overnight. Inside the garage, the usual buzz of activity was absent. Tools lay untouched on workbenches. The coffee pot sat cold and empty. In the corner, Marlene methodically packed supplies into boxes, her movements mechanical. "What are you doing?" Arya asked, though she already knew the answer. Marlene didn't look up. "Being realistic. We can't run programs without a building. Can't help kids without resources." "So that's it? We just give up?" Grizzly emerged from the office, his usually cheerful face drawn with exhaustion. "Nobody's giving up, kid. Sometimes you just have to accept when something's finished." Arya's chest tightened as she watched more members arrive, each carrying the same defeated expression. They moved like ghosts through the garage, avoiding eye contact, speaking in whispers. The heart had been ripped from their community. Unable to bear the heavy atmosphere, Arya walked outside to the youth center's remains. She sank down on a concrete barrier, staring at the blackened walls that had held so much hope. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she fingered the rusted key hanging around her neck. "You're crying." Arya startled at the voice. Misty stood a few feet away, hands shoved deep in her pockets, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept. "Yeah, I guess I am," Arya admitted, wiping her cheeks. Misty kicked at some loose gravel. "Are you leaving too?" "What? No, Because you can't." Misty's voice cracked. "You're the first grown-up who didn't disappear when things got hard. You can't quit now." The raw honesty in the teenager's voice hit Arya like a physical blow. She remembered her own feelings of abandonment, the way Redwing had refused to leave her behind even when it cost him everything. "Come here," Arya said softly, patting the barrier beside her. After a moment's hesitation, Misty sat down. "You're right," Arya said. "I'm not going anywhere, but I need your help. What would make this place better if we could rebuild it?" Misty's eyes lit up as she began to talk. Better art supplies, a real computer lab, maybe even a small recording studio for kids interested in music. As she spoke, Arya's mind began to race with possibilities. She spent the rest of the day making calls and taking notes. Local businesses, community organizations, former Guardian Wheels members who had drifted away over the years. Each conversation sparked new ideas, new potential connections. By evening, her notebook was filled with scribbled plans: a charity motorcycle run, an online fundraising campaign, a community fair with local vendors donating proceeds. Each piece alone might not be enough, but together? Arya's hands shook as she dialed Helen's number. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." Helen listened quietly as Arya outlined her ideas, her voice growing stronger with each word. When she finished, there was a long pause. "You sound just like him," Helen said finally. "Like who?" "Redwing. That same fierce determination to help, no matter the odds." Helen took a deep breath. "What do you need from me?" Arya's throat tightened. "Everything. Your support, your help organizing, your belief that this can work." "You have all of that and more," Helen replied without hesitation. "I've never been more proud of you." After hanging up, Arya spread her notes across her kitchen table. Her coffee grew cold as she typed, deleted, and retyped, trying to capture the vision growing clearer in her mind. The clock ticked past midnight, but she barely noticed. Finally, she sat back and looked at the document header she had just typed. Redwing's Last Ride Home Charity Event. Rebuilding Hope 1 mile at a time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she prepared to outline the details that would bring this dream to life. Arya arrived at the Guardian Wheels garage early the next morning, her proposal clutched tightly in her hands. Her heart pounded as she watched the members gather, their faces still showing the weight of recent events. "I have an idea," she announced, her voice stronger than she felt. "A charity motorcycle ride. We'll call it Redwing's Last Ride Home." The silence that followed felt heavy. Marlene crossed her arms, looking skeptical. "Honey, organizing something like that takes weeks of planning, permits, insurance." "I've already researched everything we need," Arya said, spreading her notes across a workbench. "We can do this. Together." Jax moved closer, studying the proposal. "It's not a bad idea. Get the community involved. Show them what we're really about." "But who would even come?" Grizzly asked quietly. "People will come," Arya insisted. "I know they will. This center means something to this town, even if they don't realize it yet." Slowly, hesitantly, the members began to gather around the workbench. As Arya explained each part of her plan, she saw sparks of hope returning to their eyes. "I could handle the route planning," Marlene offered finally. "Make sure we've got rest stops, fuel stations mapped out." "And I know which permits we'll need," Jax added. "I've got contacts at City Hall." Misty, who had been lurking in the background, stepped forward. "I can make posters, really cool ones." The next week became a whirlwind of activity. Every morning, Aria coordinated teams of volunteers. Misty worked for hours on vibrant posters featuring a stylized phoenix rising from flames, while Marlene transformed her office into a command center covered in maps and schedules. Jack spent his days navigating city bureaucracy, securing the necessary permits and insurance. His social work connections proved invaluable as he arranged for local media coverage and support from other community organizations. Grizzly surprised everyone by reaching out to dozens of former Guardian Wheels members. "They remember what this place meant," he said gruffly. "They just needed a reason to come back." Helen threw herself into the preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. "I'll handle registration and waivers," she volunteered. "And I know some church groups that might help with food donations for the post-ride celebration." They visited local businesses door to door, Aria sharing their story while Misty displayed her artwork. Some turned them away, but others listened. A local diner promised to provide lunch for volunteers. An auto parts store offered gift certificates as raffle prizes. A printing shop agreed to produce Misty's posters at cost. Small donations began appearing. $5 here, $20 there. A collection jar at the garage slowly filled with loose change and crumpled bills. Each contribution, no matter how modest, felt like a victory. "Look at this," Marlene said one afternoon, showing Aria her phone. Former members were sharing the event on social media, promising to attend. Local riding clubs pledged their support. The story of the burned center and its resurrection attempt was spreading. Even the city officials who had seemed so eager to shut them down began showing interest. "Good press," Jax explained with a knowing smile. "Nobody wants to be seen opposing a charity event for at-risk youth." The nights grew long as they worked, but no one complained. Aria often found Misty asleep on the garage couch, surrounded by art supplies. Grizzly would quietly cover her with a blanket before returning to his phone calls with old friends. Helen watched her daughter with growing pride. "You found your purpose," she said one evening as they sorted registration forms. "Red Wing would be so proud." The night before the charity ride, Aria stood alone in the garage. Red Wing's leather jacket hung on the wall, a silent witness to their efforts. She reached out, touching the worn leather gently. "I hope I'm doing right by you," she whispered. "I hope I'm making this place what you always wanted it to be, a real home for people who need one." The jacket offered no answer, but somehow, in the quiet of the garage, Aria felt at peace. Tomorrow would decide everything, but for now, she allowed herself to believe that somewhere, somehow, Red Wing was watching and smiling. Dawn painted the desert sky in soft pinks and golds as Aria pulled into the empty parking lot. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the metal storage container holding the event supplies. The air was cool, carrying that special stillness unique to early desert mornings. "Need a hand?" Grizzly's deep voice startled her. He appeared beside her, already lifting tent poles from the container. Together they began setting up registration tables and welcome banners. Helen arrived moments later with boxes of forms and coffee. The rising sun cast long shadows across the pavement as they worked, the quiet broken only by the soft clink of metal poles and rustling canvas. The first motorcycle rumbled in just as they finished securing the last tent. Then another. And another. Soon the parking lot filled with the steady growl of engines as riders began pouring in from every direction. Leather-clad figures dismounted their bikes, many wearing patches from different riding clubs across the county. "I can't believe how many people came," Aria whispered, watching the crowd grow. An older man approached her, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "You're Red Wing's girl, aren't you? He pulled me out of a real bad situation back in 1987. Never forgot what he did for me." Similar stories emerged throughout the morning. A woman tearfully described how the Guardian Wheels had helped her son stay in school. A young couple shared how the youth center had given them a safe place to stay when they had nowhere else to go. Misty and Jax worked the registration table, their excitement infectious. "Look at all these people," Misty called out, waving her clipboard. "We're gonna save our center." When it was time to begin the ride, Arya climbed into the lead truck beside Grizzly. Her heart pounded as they pulled onto the desert highway, hundreds of motorcycles following in formation behind them. The scene was hauntingly familiar. The stretch of road, the desert landscape, the thundering engines. But instead of fear, Arya felt only hope. Through the rearview mirror, she watched the endless line of bikes stretching into the distance. Sunlight glinted off chrome and metal, creating a river of light flowing through the desert. At each planned stop, more donations poured in. Local news crews appeared, capturing the stunning turnout. By late afternoon, when they returned to the starting point, Marlene was frantically calculating totals on her phone. "Arya," she called out, tears in her eyes. "We did it. We more than did it. We can rebuild the center and add that second floor we always dreamed about." The celebration lasted well into the evening. Arya hugged countless people, her throat tight with emotion as rider after rider pressed donations into her hands, each sharing another story about Red Wing's impact on their lives. That night, exhausted but happy, Arya fell into a deep sleep. In her dream, she found herself once again on that familiar desert highway. But this time, when the leather-clad figure appeared, he slowed his bike beside her. Redwing removed his helmet, revealing kind eyes and a warm smile that felt achingly familiar. "You found home," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. The following week brought new life to the charred remains of the youth center. Early Monday morning, construction crews arrived with equipment and supplies purchased through the charity ride funds. Arya watched in wonder as volunteers streamed in, carrying tools and wearing determined smiles. Grizzly organized the work crews, while Marlene managed the renovation schedule. Day by day, the building transformed. New walls rose where burned ones had stood. Fresh drywall replaced scorched panels. The acrid smell of smoke gave way to sawdust and paint. Misty and the other teens pitched in wherever they could, painting walls and sorting new donations. Their laughter echoed through the halls, bringing warmth back to the space that had nearly been lost forever. Helen appeared daily with her station wagon loaded with homemade sandwiches and cold drinks. "You're all working too hard to go hungry," she'd say, setting up impromptu picnics for the workers. She watched Arya with quiet pride, seeing how naturally her daughter had found her place among these people. After 2 weeks of intense work, the new center stood ready. Sunlight streamed through clean windows onto fresh carpeting. New computers hummed in the study room. The kitchen gleamed with donated appliances. Even the mural Arya and Misty had started had been restored, now spanning an entire wall. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, families packed the new community room. Music played while children explored the space, their excited voices filling every corner. Teens who had worried their safe haven was gone forever now grinned as they claimed their favorite spots. Grizzly approached Arya during the celebration, holding something in his weathered hands. "This belonged to Redwing," he said softly, presenting her with a leather patch labeled Homebound in faded threading. "He would have wanted you to have it." Tears welled in Arya's eyes as she traced the letters with her finger. Before she could speak, Misty wrapped her in a tight hug. "Your family now," the teen whispered fiercely. "You didn't give up on us." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Arya stood alone in the quiet center. Fresh paint and new beginnings scented the air. "I'm home," she whispered, feeling the truth of those words deep in her heart. Stepping outside, she tilted her face toward the star-filled desert sky. The nightmares that had haunted her now felt distant, replaced by peace. Somewhere, she knew, her biker angel was watching over this place, over all of them, his final wish fulfilled in ways greater than he could have imagined. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.